And now our authors take us to look at the problem of evil, and they label this section the inductive problem of evil. And so they tell us that, as we saw in part 2, classical apologetics have responded at great length to the problem of evil. As traditionally defined, this is a logical or deductive problem that presents a seemingly contradiction in the theistic view, right? Specifically, the deductive problem of evil asks whether it is logically possible for an all-good, all-powerful God to exist simultaneously with the world he created, and yet it has evil in it, right? In other words, if he's all good, then he wants evil. He wants all good to happen. If he's all powerful, he's able to get what he wants, which is all good. So the question is, then why does evil exist, right?
Right.
And so that's the logical or deductive problem of evil.
Mm-hmm. And so that's where the classicalists would tend to root themselves in, but the evidentialists tend to take a different way. So many modern skeptics continue to cite it in this deductive form. Some non-theistic philosophers acknowledge that the problem of evil fails to prove a logical consistency in the theistic worldview. As classical apologists and philosophers have pointed out, an all-good and all-powerful God might choose to create a world in which evil would arise if God had some good reason for doing it. Of course, we're going to cite Scott Christensen's What About Evil for more on that that we covered in whole, and then you can look at any portion of that book that we covered.
All right. And so our authors tell us, but non-theistic philosophers have not been entirely satisfied with this particular defense, right? That the idea here that, well, God might have a good reason for having evil, right? Well, they argue that a much more difficult version of the problem of evil still remains to be addressed. Granted, at least for the sake of argument, that it is possible that God created a world where evil exists. How likely is it how likely is this to be, in fact, the case, right? So the issue here is not just that evil exists, but how likely is it that evil should exist, and how much evil? Look at how much evil exists, right? So Douglas Giverett explains that the objection has the following form: God must have a morally sufficient reason for allowing any evil that he allows, but there is much evil in the world for which we can imagine no morally sufficient reason, such that it is highly unlikely that God exists, right? There's so much evil and we can't imagine the reason for it. And so it's highly unlikely that the type of God who is all good and all powerful exists. That's the basic idea here.
Right. I'm sure old Doug has a good definition for evil that comports with his worldview, and so I'm sure that's there. Well,
yeah.
Except
so this Christian philosopher has actually done some work in this particular area, and so we'll see here that he attempts to answer this particular issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, his own response to the evidential problem of evil is based on the positive evidence for God's existence. If significant evidence can be presented to show that it is highly likely that God exists, then the burden of proof is on the person who would argue that God's existence is unlikely. Moreover, if on the basis of the evidence that we conclude that God probably does exist, then, given that God is good and all-powerful, we may conclude then that God is justified in permitting evil, even if we don't know what his reason or reasons may be.
And so that's kind of his approach to trying to get around this particular evil, this problem of evil. Another evidentialist, our book tells us, who analyzes the problem of evil along inductive lines is John Hare. He notes that while any form of the problem of evil is insufficient as a deductive proof of God's non-existence, a more defensible version of the argument reasons that the amount of evil we experience makes the existence of an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God unlikely. And so after he surveys recent attempts to deal with this evidential problem of evil and deeming them all inadequate, Hare suggests that the only viable solution may be what he calls a disjunctive explanation, right? So a disjunct is kind of a this or this or this or this or this kind of thing, right? So the explanation will have the following form. X, that is evil, is to be explained by either A, B, C, or some other factor. In other words, there is no one explanation for each instance of evil. Bad things happen for a variety of reasons. And so to develop and refine a person's faith, perhaps, and character, to bring about a revelation of God's glory, to experience suffering vicariously in someone else's place, to punish people for their own acts of evil, to alert people to physical dangers, biologically useful pain, that sort of thing, to learn the consequences of evil, or to alert people to their need for salvation. So there's more than just one explanation of evil, is what Hare is suggesting here.
People who get addicted to drugs say, I needed to hit rock bottom in order for me to realize the danger I was in. Once I hit it, I'm glad that I overdosed, or I'm glad that my kids saw me the way that I saw them look at me, and so that's what caused me to turn my life around. So it doesn't only have to be that one thing. It could be, all right, well, you want to live without me? All right, here you go. And so that's part of what Romans 1 says. All right, you want to live wholly apart from me? I'm going to turn you over to it, and you're going to experience even more of what exactly you want. And so
somebody said the worst thing God can do is give us what we want.
Careful what you wish for.
That's right.